They thought it was a joke, leaving me in the middle of nowhere, laughing as the dust swallowed me whole. But that was the moment everything changed. Because sometimes, the day they try to break you is the day you finally wake up. The sound of their laughter still haunts me, sharp, echoing, cruel. The truck engine roared as Kyle hit the gas, tires spitting gravel across my legs. The hot wind slapped my face, carrying their laughter away until it was just a faint, ugly hum swallowed by the desert. I remember running not because I thought I could catch them, but because hope hadn't died yet. "Kyle!" I shouted, waving my arms, my voice cracking under the heat. "Kyle!" Brad and Chase leaned out the windows, phones in hand, filming, their laughter high-pitched and wild like a pack of teenagers who'd forgotten they were grown men. "Good luck, Lena," Chase yelled. "See you in 300 miles. Then they were gone. I stood there beside the gas pump, one pump, faded red, paint peeling like a wound. The air shimmered. My mouth was dry, my throat rough with disbelief. At first I thought it was just another stupid prank. Kyle loved those, loved making me the punchline. I'd roll my eyes, fake a smile, tell myself it was harmless. But this felt different. Minutes passed, 10, 20. I waited on the curb, clutching the bottle of energy drink I'd bought for him still cold, condensation running down my fingers. My phone buzzed once before dying completely. A single text. "Kyle, don't be mad, babe. Just a prank. We'll come back in a bit." I stared at it. My reflection warped on the cracked screen, my eyes hollow. I didn't laugh. There was nothing funny left inside me. I tried to steady my breathing, but my chest felt like it was closing in. I went inside the little store attached to the pump, a flickering fluorescent light, the faint smell of gasoline and chips gone stale. The clerk, an older man with a gray beard, barely looked up. "Truck left you?" he muttered. I nodded, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, they'll be back." He shrugged. "They always say that." I stepped back outside. The sun beat down. Sweat trickled down my spine. For the first time in my marriage, I didn't feel small. I felt empty. And sometimes emptiness is worse than pain because it's the moment you realize the love you've been protecting never existed. A few cars passed on the highway, just enough to remind me I was still visible, still stranded. I waved once, half-heartedly, then stopped. Pride tasted bitter, but fear was worse. An hour passed, then 2. I sat on the curb again, watching a tumbleweed roll by like something out of an old western. A trucker stopped for gas, glanced at me, then drove off. My mouth was dry. My thoughts ran wild. What if they never come back? What if this was it? The truth hit slow, like a sickness settling into my bones. They weren't coming back anytime soon, and I didn't want them to. That realization burned hotter than the Sunday. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't just a prank. It was a reflection of years spent laughing off cruelty, of swallowing tears, of defending the indefensible. Every joke at my expense, every eye roll, every lighten up Lena, it all led here. When the minivan pulled in, it felt like a miracle. A mother with 2 kids in the back, windows cracked, radio humming softly. She looked at me sweaty, trembling, clutching a bottle of warm energy drink like it was my lifeline. "You okay, honey?" she asked. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to say my husband would be back soon, but the truth caught in my throat. "Not really," I whispered. "Could you take me north? Just anywhere." She hesitated, then nodded. "Get in." "As far as I'm going, at least." The air inside the van smelled like crayons and French fries and safety. Her name was Marcy. Her daughter offered me half a cookie from the back seat. I smiled weakly, whispered thanks, and looked out the window. We drove for hours. The sky turned orange, then purple. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I think I'd already cried too much in silence. Behind closed doors, every time Kyle said something cruel and called it funny. Marcy dropped me at a small bus station just before dark. The neon sign flickered, half the letters missing. I thanked her, clutching the $10 bill she pressed into my hand. "Just in case," she said. "You'll be okay." I used the last bit of battery on my dying phone to send one message, the only one that mattered. "Me, Aunt May, can I come stay with you for a while?" I don't know where else to go. For a minute I thought she wouldn't reply. Then, just before the screen went black, her message came through. Aunt May, always come home. That night, I sat on the hard bench of the bus station, watching moths flutter around a buzzing street lamp. My reflection stared back from the glass window, hair tangled, eyes red, clothes streaked with dirt and gasoline dust. And yet, somewhere under all that exhaustion, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. A spark, a will. The bus rolled in around midnight, its headlights cutting through the darkness. I bought a one-way ticket with the crumpled cash I'd hidden for emergencies. Money Kyle never knew existed. As it rumbled away from that dusty town, I looked out the window and whispered, "You'll never see me waiting again." And for the first time in a long time, I meant it. The bus rumbled through the night like a heartbeat I couldn't calm. I sat near the window, forehead pressed to the cool glass, watching highway lights blur into golden streaks. The air smelled like diesel and old fabric softener. A man snored 2 rows back. Somewhere behind me, a baby whimpered, and a mother hummed to quiet it. It was strange the sound comforted me. It was real, alive. Not laughter at my expense, not silence loaded with judgment, just life moving forward. I thought about Kyle, about how his laughter used to make me feel safe once before it started feeling like a warning. Before it became a sound that meant humiliation was coming next. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the woman I used to be before him, the one who laughed loudly, who painted her nails bright red, who believed that kindness was enough to make people stay. Somewhere along the line, I'd traded her in for someone who tiptoed around other people's moods. The driver's voice broke through my thoughts. End of the line, folks. Last stop before the coast. Dawn had just begun to color the sky when I stepped off the bus. The air was damp and cool, carrying the faint scent of salt. I'd never been to this town before. The sign by the road read Bayshore Crossing. I liked the sound of it, like a place meant for second chances. Aunt May's address was written on a napkin in my hand, the ink slightly smudged. She hadn't changed her number in all these years. I dialed it on the cheap flip phone I'd bought at the station before boarding the bus. She picked up on the second ring. "Lena?" Her voice was soft but steady, exactly as I remembered it. "It's me," I said, my throat tightening. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said simply. When her old blue pickup pulled up to the curb, it looked exactly like something from another era. The door creaked when she stepped out, wearing a faded sweater and jeans rolled at the ankles. Her hair was grayer now, her face lined with the kind of softness that comes from living kindly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she opened her arms. I didn't realize I was crying until my cheek hit her shoulder. "Let's get you inside," she said quietly. Her home sat on a quiet street lined with chipped fences and overgrown hydrangeas. The porch steps sagged a little, and a wind chime made from seashells clinked in the breeze. Inside, everything smelled faintly of lemon polish, and bread warm, clean, alive. I stood there for a long time, unsure where to put my hands. Aunt May just smiled and said, "You don't have to explain, sweetheart. Not yet." That night, I took the longest shower of my life. I scrubbed until the scent of gasoline and sunburn was gone, until the water ran clear again. When I wrapped myself in one of her soft towels, I caught my reflection in the mirror. My skin was blotchy, my eyes swollen, but there was a strange steadiness in them. "You're not going back, Lena," I whispered to my reflection. "Not ever again." Aunt May had already made up the guest room floral quilt, mismatched furniture, an old lamp with a flickering bulb. It felt like the safest place in the world. I slipped beneath the sheets, the exhaustion pulling me under faster than I expected. When I woke, it was nearly afternoon. Sunlight streamed through lace curtains, painting patterns across the room. I could hear Aunt May in the kitchen, the clink of dishes, the hum of an old radio playing a soft country tune. I sat at the table, and she slid a plate of eggs and toast toward me. "Eat first," she said. "Then we'll talk, if you feel like it." We ate mostly in silence, but it wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that made room for breathing again. After breakfast, she reached into a drawer and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a folded piece of paper with a name written in neat cursive, Lena Morgan. "That's your mother's name," she said. "If you're starting over, you might as well carry something that's yours." The name felt strange on my tongue, unfamiliar but solid. Morgan. It didn't sound like a woman who waited at gas stations. It sounded like someone who had survived them. I can help you get work, Aunt May continued. My friend runs a diner down by the harbor. She always needs a good pair of hands. I hesitated. I haven't worked in years. Not since. She cut me off gently. You'll remember how, and if you forget, you'll learn. That evening, after she went to bed, I stood on the porch, looking out toward the sea. The horizon glowed faintly under the moonlight. The air smelled like salt and hope. I thought about how small my world had become with Kyle, how every decision revolved around avoiding his temper or appeasing his family. Here, for the first time, I didn't have to tiptoe around anyone. The stillness wasn't frightening, it was freeing. When I finally went back inside, I passed the hallway mirror again. This time, I didn't look away. My hair was still damp, curling slightly around my face. My eyes were tired but alive. That night, I fell asleep with the window open. The ocean wind filled the room, and I dreamed of laughter, but it wasn't theirs anymore. It was mine. The diner sat on the edge of town, where the road curved toward the harbor. A little neon sign hung in the window that read, Carter's, flickering between pink and white. The first time I walked in, the scent of coffee and frying bacon hit me like a memory from childhood, something simple, grounding, safe. Mrs. Carter herself was a small woman with sharp eyes and a kind smile. Her hair was always pinned up, her apron dusted with flour. You're May's niece? She asked, giving me a quick once-over. You look like her, strong bones, quiet eyes. You can start Monday. Aprons are in the back. Just like that, I had a job. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt like a miracle. I started with morning shifts, the early crowd of fishermen, old men reading newspapers, and couples who'd been coming there for decades. My hands shook the first few days as I poured coffee, afraid I'd spill or say the wrong thing. But nobody barked orders, nobody laughed at my mistakes. They just smiled, said thanks, sweetheart, and went back to their eggs. By the end of the first week, I'd memorized the regulars' orders. Earl liked his eggs over easy and his bacon crisp. Marjorie always wanted extra sugar for her tea. And there was a man who sat by the window every Tuesday, sketching boats in a little notebook. I never learned his name, but he always left a folded $1 under his cup as a tip. The rhythm of the diner became the rhythm of my healing. The hiss of the coffee machine, the ring of the bell above the door, the clatter of dishes, all of it was oddly soothing. It gave structure to days that had once felt like punishment. Every evening, I'd walk home along the boardwalk. The sea breeze tangled my hair, and seagulls screamed overhead like restless children. I'd stop at the edge of the pier and watch the sunset bleed gold across the water. Sometimes I'd close my eyes and just breathe, counting the seconds of peace I never used to have. Aunt May never pushed me to talk about the past. She simply existed beside me, knitting, humming, cooking, filling the house with gentle sounds. She reminded me that not every kind of love needs to be loud to be real. But the silence also gave me space to think. I started replaying the years with Kyle in my mind, not to torture myself, but to finally look at them without flinching. The jokes that weren't jokes. The apologies that were just words. The way his family had treated my discomfort like entertainment. At the time, I told myself that love meant patience, that a good wife forgave, adapted, waited for people to change. But love without respect isn't love, it's servitude dressed up in good intentions. One night, after closing the diner, Mrs. Carter handed me my pay in an envelope, cash, folded neatly. You're doing well, she said. People like you here. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Her words hit deeper than she probably meant them to. For years, I'd been told the opposite, that I was lucky anyone tolerated me, that I should be grateful for crumbs. Now, strangers were showing me kindness without asking for anything in return. That night, I walked home under a pale moon, the sound of waves crashing softly against the rocks. Bayshore Crossing was the kind of place where even the darkness felt alive, not menacing. Porch lights glowed in the distance, like stars scattered across the ground. When I reached Aunt May's house, I found her asleep on the couch with a book in her lap. I draped a blanket over her shoulders and stood there for a while, watching the rise and fall of her breathing. It struck me then, peace doesn't arrive all at once. It sneaks in quietly, moment by moment, until one day, you realize the noise in your head has softened. Weeks passed. I started smiling more easily. I laughed once, really laughed when a customer spilled sugar everywhere and said, "Well, at least the place is sweeter now." It had been years since laughter didn't come with a catch in my chest. Sometimes, late at night, I'd lie awake thinking about the gas station, about that version of me scared, shaking, waiting for someone who was never coming back. I didn't hate her. I pitied her. Because she still believed that being loved meant being chosen. Now, I understood something different. Being loved starts with choosing yourself. By the time autumn rolled around, the town began to feel like home. Mrs. Carter trusted me with the till. Aunt May started letting me handle grocery runs and errands. I opened a small savings account under my real name this time, and tucked away what I could. It wasn't much, but it was mine. One evening, Aunt May and I sat on the porch, sipping sweet tea while the sun dipped into the sea. The horizon was pink and gold, the waves gentle as breath. "You're quieter lately," she said, her knitting needles clicking. But not in a sad way, in a peaceful way. I smiled. I think I finally ran out of pretending. She chuckled softly. "That's when life gets real." We sat there in silence as the light faded, the air cooling around us. The crickets started their nightly chorus, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a ghost in my own story. But peace has a strange habit of inviting the unexpected. Because the next morning, when the diner doorbell jingled, I turned and saw a man stumble in, bleeding from his side. And just like that, my quiet life cracked open again. It was a slow Tuesday afternoon, one of those days when the diner felt like a sleepy heartbeat in the middle of the town. The radio hummed softly in the corner, the smell of frying onions and old coffee filling the air. I was wiping down the counter, humming along to a tune I didn't know, when the bell above the door jingled. I looked up, expecting the mailman or maybe one of the fishermen who stopped by for pie. Instead, a man stumbled through the doorway, tall, pale, and soaked in blood. For a split second, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. His shirt was torn, one hand clutching his side, leaving red fingerprints across the doorframe. His breathing came in ragged gasps. "Help!" he rasped. Then his knees buckled. The sound of his body hitting the floor snapped me into motion. "Mrs. Carter!" I yelled, rushing from behind the counter. The rag I'd been holding dropped into the spreading pool of red. She came running, eyes wide, grabbing the phone. "Call 911. I knelt beside him, pressing a towel against the wound. My hands trembled, but I pushed harder, trying to stop the bleeding. His skin was cold, slick with sweat. "You're going to be okay," I said, though my voice wavered. "Just hold on." His eyes opened, piercing, blue-gray, filled with pain but strangely focused. "Don't let them find me," he whispered. "Who?" I asked, but his eyes rolled back before he could answer. The next few minutes blurred together the shriek of sirens, the paramedics bursting through the door, the rush of questions I couldn't answer. I stood frozen as they lifted him onto a stretcher. Before they wheeled him out, he reached out blindly, fingers brushing my wrist. "Thank you," he whispered, barely audible. Then he was gone. The diner fell silent after the ambulance left, the smell of blood still clinging to the air. I scrubbed the floor long after it was clean, the image of his face burned into my mind. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old house sounded like footsteps. Every shadow felt alive. Aunt May found me sitting on the couch around midnight, staring at my hands. "You saved a life today," she said gently. I nodded, still shaken. "He said not to let them find him. I don't even know what that means." "Maybe you're not meant to not yet," she said. "Sometimes, people run for reasons we don't need to understand." Days passed. The diner returned to its normal rhythm, but something in me hadn't. I found myself glancing at the door every time the bell rang, half expecting, half fearing that he'd come back. And then, he did. It was late afternoon, about a week later. I was restocking napkins when the bell jingled again. The man from that day stood in the doorway alive, bandaged, but walking with a slight limp. The scar along his side peeked from beneath his jacket, and though he looked worn down, There was strength in the way he stood. "Coffee?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. He smiled faintly. "Only if you make it." That caught me off guard. "I'm not sure it's worth dying for," I said before I could stop myself. He chuckled, a low, quiet sound that made something in my chest loosen. "Guess we'll find out." He sat at the same booth near the window, the one with a clear view of the sea. I poured his coffee and slid it over. "You were lucky," I said softly. "You lost a lot of blood." "I've been lucky before," he replied. "Doesn't usually last." "Still," I said, "it's something." He looked up, eyes steady on mine. "What's your name?" "Lena," I said, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a secret I was hiding behind. He nodded slowly. "Grant," he said. "And thank you for that day." Most people would have looked away. "I almost did," I admitted. Then I realized I was done watching people get hurt. A quiet understanding passed between us, the kind that doesn't need words. From then on, Grant came by regularly. He never stayed long, never asked personal questions, but he always sat at the same booth. Sometimes he brought a newspaper, sometimes just stared out the window, lost in thought. The other customers noticed him too, the mysterious man with kind eyes who never said much. Mrs. Carter teased me once, saying, "Your wounded knight seems to have found his castle." I laughed it off, but deep down, there was something steady and warm about his presence. One evening, as I wiped down his booth after closing, I found a small folded note under his cup. "Thanks for the coffee. It's better when you're around." I smiled, the first genuine smile in weeks. After that, our exchanges became a quiet ritual. He'd come in, nod, I'd pour his coffee, and somehow it felt like the day wasn't complete until he left. But even as comfort settled in, I could sense something behind his eyes, a weight he carried like an invisible scar. There were moments he'd stare at the ocean with that faraway look, and I'd wonder what ghosts were sitting beside him. I didn't ask. And he didn't tell. Some silences are sacred. Still, there was something undeniable in the air, not love, not yet, but recognition. Like two people who had both seen too much and finally found a corner of the world where they didn't have to explain it. I didn't know who Grant really was. I just knew that when he was around, I didn't feel so alone anymore. And after years of feeling invisible, that was enough. The first storm of autumn rolled in without warning. One minute the sky was soft gray, the next it was a churning bruise of thunderclouds. The diner had closed early, rain hammering the windows so hard it drowned out the music. Mrs. Carter insisted I head home before the roads flooded. By the time I reached Aunt May's porch, I was soaked rain in my shoes, hair plastered to my face. I was fumbling for my keys when I saw a shadow sitting on the steps. My breath caught. It was Grant. He was drenched too, his jacket clinging to him, his hair dripping into his eyes. He looked up at me, and in that flash of lightning I saw something raw, exhaustion, maybe, or the kind of loneliness that eats at a person from the inside out. "I didn't know where else to go," he said quietly. I hesitated for a moment, then opened the door. "Come in." Aunt May was away at her church meeting. The house felt hollow without her soft humming, just the sound of rain slashing against the windows. Grant stepped inside, water pooling around his boots. I grabbed him a towel and pointed to the kitchen. "Sit. You'll ruin the floors," I teased lightly. He managed a half smile. "Pretty sure they've seen worse." I made tea while he changed into an old flannel shirt Aunt May had left on the coat rack. He sat at the table, hands wrapped around the steaming mug like it was the only warm thing left in the world. For a while, we just listened to the storm thunder rolling like distant drums, the wind howling through the trees. The air between us felt heavy but safe. Then, without looking up, he said, "I used to be a detective." The words came slowly, like each one cost him something. "In the city, narcotics division," he continued. "I got too close to something I wasn't supposed to. My partner was dirty deep in it. He set me up, left me for dead during a bust." I froze, the spoon in my hand clinking against the mug. "I survived," he said, voice low. "But the report said I was the one who turned. They needed a scapegoat. They buried the truth. I lost my badge, my apartment, my name, everything." He looked up then, And I saw that same flicker in his eyes I'd seen in my own reflection once, the look of someone who's been betrayed by the very thing they gave their life to. "I didn't mean to drag that in here," he murmured. "No," I said softly. "You didn't drag it in, you just carried it for too long." The power flickered, casting the room into shadow for a heartbeat before the lights steadied again. Outside, rain rattled against the glass like pebbles. "Do you ever wish you'd fought back?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Every day. But fighting back cost me everything once. Now I just want peace." "Yeah," I said, nodding. "I know that feeling." We didn't talk after that. The silence wasn't empty, it was full. We sat there, two broken people, wrapped in the quiet understanding that sometimes survival isn't loud or heroic. Sometimes it's just waking up and trying again. When the storm began to fade, I got up to find him a blanket. He stood too, moving to help, but I shook my head. "Sit," I said. "You're a guest. You're a guest." He smiled again, small, tired, grateful. "Thank you, Lena, for everything." His hand brushed mine as he took the blanket, just a fleeting touch, but it felt electric, not romantic, not yet just alive. After years of numbness, that was enough to make my chest ache. He slept on the couch that night. I lay awake in my room, listening to the rain ease into a whisper, wondering what it meant that I finally felt safe with someone again, not because they promised protection, but because they didn't demand anything in return. The next morning, I found him fixing the loose hinge on the screen door. He'd made coffee, his hair still damp, sleeves rolled up. "Couldn't sleep," he said. "Figured I'd earn my keep." I laughed softly. "You don't have to." "Yeah," he said, tightening a screw, "but it helps." And that became his way. Grant started showing up more often, sometimes at the diner, sometimes at Aunt May's. He'd bring tools, groceries, or just sit on the porch with me as the sun went down. We didn't label what we were. We didn't have to. The space between us filled naturally, like sunlight finding its way through old blinds. I started noticing small things, how he always scanned a room before sitting, how he flinched at sudden noises but hid it well, how he looked at me like he could see the weight I still carried but never pointed it out. And in return, he made me laugh again. Once, when Mrs. Carter complained that her coffee machine was possessed, he deadpanned, "I used to interrogate worse suspects." She nearly dropped her spatula laughing. It was strange laughter and safety in the same sentence. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed that. Still, every now and then, I caught a shadow crossing his face, a flicker of old fear when someone unfamiliar walked into the diner, or when a black SUV drove by too slowly. He was a man who'd learned to disappear but hadn't quite convinced himself he was safe. Maybe that's why I didn't ask him about his past again. I knew what it was like to live in fear of being found. We were two people rebuilding in silence, finding pieces of ourselves in each other. And just when I thought the quiet had finally become permanent, the world reminded me it never stays that way for long. Because one evening, I came home to find the front door open, swinging gently in the wind, and all the calm I had built started to tremble. The house was too quiet. That was the first thing I noticed when I stepped onto the porch. No hum of Aunt May's radio, no soft creak of her rocking chair. Just the sound of the sea wind pressing against the walls and the faint metallic squeak of the front door moving back and forth. I froze. The door was wide open. For a second I thought maybe Aunt May had forgotten to close it when she left for her errands. But then I saw it, the faint scuff marks on the threshold, the small shoe print in the dust, and the drawer by the kitchen window pulled half open, the one where she kept her spare cash. My heart dropped into my stomach. I stepped inside carefully, calling out, "Aunt May?" No answer. The air felt wrong, disturbed, like a stranger had exhaled in it. Every instinct told me to leave, to run and call someone, but I couldn't, not until I knew. I grabbed the flashlight from the counter and moved slowly down the hallway, each floorboard creaking like a warning. The photos on the wall, family portraits, faded smiles, seemed to watch me as I passed. When I reached the back door, I saw it. A fresh scratch near the lock. Someone had tried to force it open. That was enough. I backed away, hands shaking, and fumbled for my phone. The first person I called wasn't the police. It was Grant. He picked up on the second ring. "Lena?" My voice came out barely above a whisper. Someone's been here. Stay outside, he said immediately, his tone sharp, controlled. I'm on my way. The line went dead. 10 minutes later, his car screeched into the driveway. He stepped out fast, scanning the yard like a soldier entering a perimeter. The flashlight in his hand cut through the dark. He checked every window, every room, every corner. When he came back out, he looked rattled, not panicked, but focused. Nothing's missing except the cash, he said. But this wasn't random. What do you mean? He crouched near the window frame, running his fingers over the lock. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. They weren't after money that was just to make it look casual. The words made my skin crawl. He stood up, scanning the trees at the edge of the yard. The rain from earlier had stopped, leaving the air heavy and still. You've seen anyone new around lately? Any strange cars parked nearby? I shook my head. No. Why? You think someone's watching us? He didn't answer, not directly. His jaw tightened. It's possible. But if they are, they're not amateurs. Something flickered in his eyes, something I hadn't seen before. Fear. Not for himself, for me. That night, he refused to leave. He changed the locks, installed a small security camera above the porch light, and placed a flashlight beside my bed. I tried to protest, but he cut me off gently. Let me do this, he said. You've been through enough. Aunt May came home the next morning, groceries in hand, confusion written all over her face when she saw the new locks. I explained what happened while Grant checked the backyard again. She listened quietly, her eyes narrowing with a kind of old wisdom that made me uneasy. When I finished, she set down the bread she was holding and said, Sometimes the people we run from don't chase us because they want us back. They chase us because they lost control. Her words sent a chill straight through me. That night, I sat awake for hours, listening to the faint hum of the new porch camera, the rhythmic creak of the house settling. The moonlight cut pale lines across my bedroom floor. My mind kept drifting back to the gas station, to Kyle's laughter, to the way he'd looked at me like my pain was entertainment. He hadn't called. Not once. Not in 5 years. So why did it suddenly feel like the past was moving closer? Grant stayed vigilant for the next few days, checking locks, keeping an eye on the street. He tried to hide it, but I saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand hovered near his phone whenever an unfamiliar car passed. Do you think this has something to do with you? I asked one evening, as he tightened the screws on the porch railing. He paused. It could, he admitted. But I don't think it is. Then who? He hesitated just long enough for me to notice. Sometimes, trouble doesn't need a reason. It just looks for cracks. The unease settled deep in my bones. Still, when he smiled faintly and said, You're safe here, I wanted to believe him. I really did. But Aunt May's warning kept echoing in my mind. And the next morning, when I found a muddy footprint near the back porch, one too large to be Grant's belief didn't come so easily anymore. It had been nearly 5 years since I'd heard his voice. Yet when the knock came, something inside me recognized it before the sound even formed. 3 short raps, confident, deliberate, followed by silence. Grant and I were in the kitchen, sorting through Aunt May's old photo boxes. He froze, glancing toward the door. I felt my pulse spike, a strange instinct twisting deep in my stomach. The knock came again. When I opened the door, the world seemed to tilt. Kyle. Older, thinner. His once boyish face had hardened around the edges, his eyes shadowed with regret that looked too polished to be real. His hands were raised slightly, palms out, the universal gesture of surrender. Lena, he said softly, his voice almost breaking. Please, can we talk? My fingers tightened around the doorframe. For a moment, I thought I might be hallucinating, that my mind had finally conjured him from the fragments of nightmares I'd spent years trying to silence. Behind me, I heard quiet footsteps. Grant. He came up beside me, calm and steady as always. Who are you? He asked, voice low but firm. Kyle's eyes darted to him, confusion flashing across his face. I'm her husband. The word hit like a slap. Husband. It sounded wrong, outdated, like something that belonged to another life entirely. I stepped forward, voice flat. No, you're not. Kyle blinked, stunned by the calm in my tone. For the first time, I saw him hesitate, the man who once thrived on control, now fumbling to find his footing. "Lena, please," he said quickly. "Just give me 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Grant's gaze flicked toward me, waiting for a sign. I gave a small nod. "It's okay," I whispered. "I'll hear him out." Grant stayed inside as I stepped onto the porch. The air smelled of sea salt and rain-soaked leaves. The sky was the color of slate, the kind of gray that feels like it's holding its breath. Kyle shoved his hands into his jacket pockets, looking smaller than I remembered. His voice shook as he began. "I've been looking for you," he said, "ever since the video." "What video?" I asked coldly. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Brad and Chase. They started a podcast last year, some kind of stupid prank confessions thing. One day, they told the story, our story, the gas station. They thought it was funny. Said it was their best prank ever." My stomach turned. "They filmed it?" I asked quietly, though part of me already knew the answer. He nodded, shame flickering across his face. "They posted the clip. It went viral. Millions of views. People were furious, said it was abuse, not comedy. I didn't even know they'd uploaded it until I saw it blowing up online." His eyes lifted to mine, desperate. When I watched it, something in me broke. I left them, walked out on the business, the house, everything. I've been trying to fix my life ever since. I just needed to find you. I stared at him, expression unreadable. "You thought you could fix it with an apology?" "No," he said quickly. "I just wanted you to know that I regret it. Every second of it." "What I did." "What you all did," I cut in. "You laughed. You drove away. You left me in the middle of nowhere, Kyle. That wasn't a prank. That was cruelty." He looked down, jaw tightening. I know that now. I thought you were mad, that you'd cool off and come home." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was pathetic. "You thought I'd come home after that?" He met my eyes, and for a brief second, I saw the same man I'd once loved, the one who could make me believe anything. But now, that face only reminded me of how much of myself I'd lost to his excuses. "I left," I said firmly, "because I realized that day who you were and who I wasn't willing to be anymore." The front door creaked open behind me. Grant stepped outside, silent but solid, his presence filling the space like armor. He didn't say a word, didn't need to. The message was clear, she's not alone anymore. Kyle's eyes darted between us, confusion giving way to something sharper, jealousy, maybe, or realization. "Who is he?" Kyle asked, his tone edged with disbelief. I didn't flinch. "My fiancé." The word landed between us like a verdict. Grant moved closer, his hand brushing gently against the small of my back, not possessive, just grounding. Kyle's shoulders slumped. Whatever words he'd planned next died on his tongue. For the first time, I saw him truly see me not as the woman he used to control, but as someone standing tall, unshaken, untouchable. "I guess I deserved that," he said softly. "You did," I replied, "and more." He nodded, eyes glistening. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you're okay." Then he turned and walked down the path, disappearing into the fog rolling off the ocean. I stood there, arms crossed, heart steady. Grant's hand lingered at my shoulder. "You all right?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah, for the first time, I think I am." That night, I sat on the back porch, the same spot where I used to drink tea with Aunt May. The air was cool, the stars faint behind drifting clouds. My mind was quiet, not empty, not chaotic, just still. Kyle had finally found me. But more importantly, I had already found myself. 5 years ago, I stood at a gas station with dust in my hair, no money in my pocket, and no one looking for me. Now, I stood in a courthouse hallway, sunlight pouring through tall glass windows, a navy blazer hugging my shoulders, and Grant's hand warm in mine. The world had shifted not because it became kinder, but because I had finally stopped shrinking for it. Reporters whispered at the far end of the hall, their cameras clicking softly. I caught snippets of phrases: viral prank brothers, civil case, victim testifying today. I wasn't here for revenge. I was here for truth. Inside the courtroom, the air felt colder, sharper. Brad and Chase sat at the defense table, expensive suits failing to disguise the twitching of their hands. Their arrogance, the trademark of their online fame, had dissolved into something pitiful. And there, behind them, sat Kyle. He looked smaller somehow, tired, eyes sunken from too many sleepless nights. When he saw me enter, he straightened, then froze. Grant's hand stayed steady at my back, anchoring me. The judge called my name. I took the stand. For a moment, I just looked at them, the men who had once turned my pain into entertainment. Their viral empire had collapsed after their latest stunt, a cruel prank that left a young woman in the hospital. Now the same laughter that once made them rich had become evidence of their downfall. The lawyer cleared his throat. Miss Morgan, he corrected. Can you tell the court what happened the day your husband and his brothers left you? I took a slow breath. My voice didn't shake. I remember the heat, I began. The way the air shimmered over the asphalt. I remember the sound of their laughter fading as they drove away. I thought they'd come back. I waited. I kept waiting until I realized I wasn't waiting for them anymore. I was waiting for myself. Silence filled the room. Even the cameras went still. They called it a prank, I continued. But what they did wasn't harmless. It was humiliation. It was control dressed as comedy. People think these moments disappear once the video stops, but they don't. They live under your skin. They shape how you walk, how you speak, how much of yourself you're willing to show the world. I paused. My throat ached, but my voice held firm. When they left me there, they didn't just abandon me on the side of the road. They left me inside a version of myself that no longer existed. And that's when I realized love that makes you smaller isn't love. It's a leash. Brad shifted in his chair, face pale. Chase stared down at his hands. Even Kyle's eyes glistened, though he tried to hide it. The lawyer nodded. Thank you, Miss Morgan. When I stepped down from the stand, Grant stood as if to meet me halfway, his eyes saying everything words couldn't. I took my seat beside him, heart pounding not from fear, but from release. When the session ended, the courtroom emptied into a flood of murmurs and camera flashes. Outside, the light was blinding. I hadn't realized how long it had been since I'd stepped into the world without flinching. Kyle followed me out. He hesitated at the steps, the same way he had the last time we spoke. Lena, he called softly. I turned. He looked hollow, not broken, just stripped bare. I don't know what I thought would happen, he said. I do, I replied gently. You thought I'd still be waiting? He winced, but didn't argue. Do you still hate me? I shook my head. No, I just don't belong to you anymore. For the first time, he didn't try to talk over me. He just nodded. You look happy. I am, I said simply. He followed my gaze to Grant, who stood a few steps away, watching quietly. He's lucky, Kyle murmured. So am I said, and meant it. Kyle gave a small nod and acceptance, maybe, or surrender. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd, into the noise of a world that would never remember his laughter the same way again. I didn't watch him go. I didn't need to. Grant reached for my hand, his thumb brushing gently against the inside of my wrist. You okay? He asked, like he always did. I am now, I whispered. Truly. We walked down the courthouse steps together. Cameras flashed, voices called, but they all faded behind us. The air smelled of asphalt and freedom. The sunlight hit my face, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like hiding from it. 5 years ago, I was the woman left at a gas station, desperate, humiliated, forgotten. Today, I was the woman who left him standing alone. That's the thing about starting over. It's not about erasing what broke you. It's about learning how to walk forward with the scars and still smile. And as Grant's hand tightened around mine, I finally understood what Aunt May meant all those years ago. Sometimes, the people who chase you aren't looking for love. They're looking for control. But when you stop running, when you finally turn around and see them for who they are, you realize they can't take what you already reclaimed. Your peace. Your name. Yourself. And that's the real ending.